Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular weekly update about what's going on in the legislature in Olympia, where they are working on new laws, possibly new taxes, drafting a budget. But anyway, they are taking steps during this 105-day scheduled session that will affect all of us across the state, and that's where the Washington Policy Center really tries to keep an eye on what's going on and then report that to you, our supporters and our audience. And mentioning that is, as always, I encourage those who are watching this to please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also share it with your friends if you think it's valuable. We are actually being very successful at building a broad audience of many thousands of viewers, and we really like that. It also creates an independent platform that's separate from traditional corporate media or from the spin that's coming out of our political world. And we are just presenting the policy facts as we see it, trying not to be too wonky, but also be informative about bills that we think are important. And with that, I'll start the update by saying that we are in the 48th day of a scheduled 105-day session. As I mentioned, the policy cutoff date to pass bills out of committee has passed. The fiscal cutoff date to pass budget-related bills out of committee has also passed. The budget process is still ongoing, and that'll go on till the end of the session. And the next cutoff date is March 12th, when bills will have to pass their House of Origin before they can be considered still alive for the session. So that's the next deadline that's coming up. One quick side note I think I'll pass along to everyone is that I'm often asked, like, how do you follow the news? What are good sources? Who are good reporters that are out there? There is a lot of justified suspicion about reporters who have agendas, reporters who are not even journalists. They just have their own political agenda that they're pushing, or they actually report things that aren't true, that you find out later are not true. So I understand that problem. We at the Washington Policy Center track the media all the time. Of course, that's one of our sources. I thought I would mention two sources that we find to be really reputable and reliable. One of those is reporter Jerry Cornfield, who reports for the Washington State Standard. Jerry has been around for many years, knows Washington, D.C., or Washington State inside out. But the great thing is that he's a straight up professional, almost like old school journalist, and it's always fun to read his articles. Next is a similar reporter, Carlene Johnson, who is now at Center Square. Same thing, straight up sort of hard-headed political reporter, tell you what's going on. So I thought I would mention those two sources for people who are wondering where to go to follow the news. On to issues. First issue, of course, is the budget. So the House and the Senate in Olympia are working on their own budget plans. This is part of the routine process. What's not routine is that our new governor, Bob Ferguson, I talked to a legislator about this, and he reports kind of inside spin that the governor has been trying to have more influence in the budget talks early in the process. And legislative leaders, particularly in the House, have essentially told the governor, like, where's your proposal? I mean, Inslee wrote a budget before he left office, but there's been no formal proposal from Bob Ferguson yet. And so what House leaders said essentially is, hey, Governor, you want to be in part of this process? Let's see your plan. And so Governor Ferguson did announce a plan a few days ago on February 27th. And as part of that, he is proposing $4 billion in cuts. And this provides him with an outline so that he can be part of the budget negotiations that are going on in the House and the Senate. And that makes sense. I get a little bit of the sense that Governor Ferguson is a bit inexperienced in how this process works. It is sausage grinding, it's insider. What's also interesting is that all these divisions and arguments happen among Democrats. So the Democrats are in charge of House, Senate, and the governorship, and yet they frequently have a falling out behind the scenes. Having said that, I will compliment Governor Ferguson on being much more open and innovative and reaching out, which is not a style that Governor Jay Inslee had in his 12 years as governor. As I've said before, he hardly ever spoke to Republicans, and he didn't even like to speak to Democrats who didn't agree with him. So Ferguson is taking a much more collaborative approach, and it's encouraging to see that. Next, on to interpretation. So the coverage of Ferguson's budget, almost every headline said that he was proposing $4 billion in cuts over 4 years to deal with the state's budget shortfall or deficit, however you want to phrase that. Here's the interpretation. There aren't any cuts. In public financing, all supposed cuts are reductions in increases. The current operating budget for the state is about $72 billion. In the next 2-year fiscal period, 2005 to 27, that figure will go up by billions of dollars. Everybody knows that. The state has plenty of money. Revenues are increasing. What's sensitive about this is that the people of our state work hard and they pay their taxes, and everybody sees that our tax burden is fairly heavy. It's a little bit of an illusion that we don't have a state income tax, so it feels like we're not taxed as heavily, but property taxes and sales taxes and B&O business taxes are constantly going up, and there are dozens and dozens. I lost track in looking at what's called the tax reference manual, a wonky thing that the government puts out, in counting how many taxes that we pay. It's lots. And the dollar value of those adds up very quickly for the average person. So if you take federal and state, local, county, and add those all together, it's very typical for a working family to be paying 40 to 50% of their income in taxes. And yet it's so kind of spread out that nobody really notices it. So that's the larger context. The next thing is that we hear about a $12 billion shortfall over the next 4-year outlook, or maybe it's 15 billion or 8 billion. The number keeps changing. So depends on how you measure, but really what's going on is to create a sense of budget panic that the state is short on money and absolutely has to increase our tax burden. There's no question that that's what's coming. Anybody who has been through this round in the past, as we at Washington Policy Center have been, we can already see how this movie's going to end. So it's really kind of an insider, elaborate kabuki dance that they're going through in order to end up almost certainly with proposing a tax increase. Whether that goes through or not, we'll have to wait and see. What is other evidence that I have for that? Well, one is the response of Senator June Robinson. She's a Democrat from Everett and one of the main budget writers in the Senate. Her response to the governor's proposal, and this is all about framing and messaging. Her response was, our job is to take a balanced approach. We can't do this by cuts alone. Again, cuts. We can't do this by merely reducing the overspending that we're planning in the future. We have to take a balanced approach. Well, I can tell you, again, in the world of public finance where we live, that is code for tax increase. Balanced approach means cutting a dollar that that we're not going to spend in return for a real dollar taken out of people's pockets. So that's what we see coming up. She used another phrase saying that we must consider progressive revenue options. Again, that's code for we're going to raise your taxes. So this is not firm yet. One thing I always see that drives things is in the public sector, greed is a factor. So we always hear about capitalism being attacked because it's driven by greed. Well, take a look at public financing at almost any level of government. And one of the number one human motivations that you will see is we would like to have more money. And but there always has to be a narrative, a cover story that goes with that. And that's what we see being set up. Another point regarding the budget is that at the federal level, they're going through this huge government efficiency process. And whether you buy that or not, or believe that it's real, what that new efficiency agency is reporting is that they have saved $50 billion in a month. So at Washington State, even a fraction of that effort would resolve the deficit, whether it's 15 billion or 8 billion or 12 billion. But an attitude that says we are going to get government spending under control, eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. It's remarkable what's being done at the federal level. It is disruptive. People resist change. There are beneficiaries of public spending that don't want to give it up. That's all true. But a little more creativity and aggressiveness at the state level would solve our so-called budget crisis pretty quickly. So that's that observation. Next is even the governor has put huge sections of the budget as privileged and off the table for discussion. Those are K-12 education spending, which is nearly half the operating budget. Anything that benefits unions, collective bargaining contracts, those are all locked in and may not be discussed. So that's another area where certain groups that are benefiting public employees, certainly powerful unions that get engaged in political campaigns, that have been involved in electing our current leadership in the state, they are put in a privileged position, as I say, and told, well, any spending that benefits you, that's okay, that's off the table. We're going to make cuts in other places. And you'll hear a lot about cuts in Medicaid, healthcare, daycare programs. Anything that is sensitive to the public is pushed out in front, while those entrenched groups that are receiving billions of dollars in spending, they're not part of the discussion. So again, that's part of the framing. The next thing we hear constantly from lawmakers, this does make me laugh, because you'll constantly hear about how hard this is, budgeting, oh, it's such hard work. Oh, it's so difficult. Well, for most of us across the state, we would love to be in this position with rising revenues. So I just completely tune out whenever I hear a lawmaker whining about how hard his or her job is. It's not like we have some kind of big fiscal crisis. Given the resources that they have, any reasonable group of people, even just taken out of the general population, could put together a budget that would be balanced and would work. So again, that's how we should think about that. Maybe I'll wrap up on a more positive note, and that is we do applaud Governor Ferguson's initiative. He is being part of the process. As I said earlier, I think it's more open. So we will see. The next step is the House Democrats will pass their budget proposal. The Senate Democrats will do the same thing. There will be a reconciliation process, and then the governor will be engaged in those talks as well. So we'll go forward from there. Moving on to the next issue, which is, again, a positive reform that's coming. And again, because of the leadership of our new governor, emergency powers reform. This is SB 5434. This bill was in the Senate State Government Committee. It looked like it was not going to make the policy cutoff. News reporting shows that the governor made a phone call to Senator Valdez, who was the chairman of that committee, and broke that bill loose from committee, and it ended up moving forward in the process. Emergency powers reform is very common sense. It would give Washington State the same safeguards that almost every other state has, and that is that a governor could exercise emergency power for 90 days. And after that point, he would have to check in with the legislature. There are some other safeguards in there as well. This bill was proposed when Jay Inslee was governor. No big surprise that he just squashed it entirely, wouldn't even talk about it. But look at Inslee's record. He governed 975 days under emergency powers. He issued more than 85 mandates. And so he was not the person who was going to be open to reforming this power. Ferguson, however, is, and in fact, he's moving it along. Another symbolic advantage of that is that this idea is completely bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats have co-sponsored the bill. And if the governor ends up signing it, I think it's something to celebrate that both parties are able to come together and solve what is a fairly obvious problem. That could be a good precedent for tackling other problems in the future, and we'll hope that continues. Next is a bill that's important to everybody in the state, SB 5708. It's being promoted by Senator Noel Frame, Democrat from Seattle. This is to protect children online. It makes perfect sense. It's another bill that a lot of Republicans support. However, our own hound dog investigator, Mark Harmsworth, did something that a lot of lawmakers themselves don't do. He actually read the bill line by line. He found one provision in there which would actually block parents from monitoring their children's online and smartphone use. That maybe wasn't the intention of the sponsors. That's a little hard to tell, but the language itself would have created a burden for parents. This was brought up in committee. Republican Senator Keith Wagner announced almost immediately that he would offer an amendment to fix the problem. The way Senator Wagner describes it is, hey, just changing or taking out one sentence in the bill is enough to fix this problem. So again, we applaud the progress that he's making there. It looks like Democrats are open to that. So I think that'll help this bill move forward. But it does show part of a pattern that's a little bit concerning to everybody across the state, including us, and that is the following. If you look at SB 5181, that's the much more controversial bill to roll back parental rights legislation that was passed last year, and the ardent opposition that there is to any form of school choice in our state, unlike other states that are moving forward with that. You begin to see a pattern that almost anything that will divide parents from their children, to make it more difficult for parents to raise their kids and to direct their education, there's a kind of opposition anger against any proposal that would move in the direction of helping parents. And we see this pattern with a couple of different bills. Whether all those bills are going to pass, we're not sure. The parental rights rollback is moving forward like a freight train. And so there doesn't seem to be, the Democrats are determined to push that through. It's passed the Senate, it's moved over to the House. So that's moving forward. Whether it's interesting whether Ferguson, if it lands on his desk, whether he would sign it. A lot of people are very upset about that bill. The online protecting children online bill looks like it's going to be fixed, but we have not seen this pattern pushed so aggressively in the past, which is directly going at the relationship between parents and their kids. And you can imagine the response of most families and moms and dads across the state when they get this message. So we'll see how that issue plays out. Next bill that I want to cite is SB 5744. This is an interesting and maybe kind of comical bill, which is it proposes a full-time legislature for Washington State, as if we need that. So as I mentioned, during a long session, we have about 3 months, 3.5 months, and that's what's happening this year. In off-year sessions, we have a 2-month session. What this bill would do, introduced by Senator Hasagawa, who's a Democrat from the Renton area, is allow the legislature to be in session all year long, similar to the United States Congress. And from a democracy point of view, our attitude is, well, who would want that? Okay, that we have enough laws, we have enough regulations. It's hard enough to track what lawmakers are doing and maintain accountability without going through to a full-time legislature. The other part is the nuts and bolts part. So again, our staff did some calculations. Right now, lawmakers get about $112,000 in per diem compensation for being serving. Especially during a long session. They also get medical coverage. They get a pension. So this would just add to the cost of having the legislature. But the thing that impressed me as a researcher is during the short sessions we have now, there are 1,732 bills have been introduced so far this session. Those are not going to make it to the end. A full-time legislature would spend even more time introducing bills that we don't need, that aren't going anywhere. We just don't see how it's a good use of their time. The other thing is the wisdom that says that, you know, work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. So having 12 months to pass a budget is not going to help any more than having 3 months to pass a budget. We would just end up in exactly the same time crunch that we have now. And proof of that is our own United States Congress. Doesn't matter how much time they build in, they always end up facing a government shutdown at some midnight deadline. The same thing would happen with a full-time state legislature. It would further distance career politicians from the real world. Currently, part-time lawmakers at least have to stay in contact with, have a different job or have some other means of support besides being a lawmaker. That bill died in the, at least so far, in the state government committee. That makes sense. This bill has been introduced many times in the past. It has failed each time. The reason I bring it up is because these are often a multi-year effort. And if you don't jump on something quick, let people know what's going on, then the bill eventually begins to gain traction later. So Senator Hasagawa will probably introduce this bill again in the next session, and that's something that we need to watch for when that comes up. So last issue I'll touch on, well, 2 more quickly, is SB 5710. This bill would authorize the state ferry system to buy clean diesel ferries to replace the aging Issaquah class boats that date from the 1980s. There are 6 ferries that are approaching the 40, 50-year mark of their service. They need to be replaced. In 2018, Jay Inslee issued a mandate that banned the ferry service from buying clean diesel technology, instead requiring hybrid electric ferries. That was 6 years ago, and almost no progress has been made on getting new ferry boats for our system. Boats are often out of service. Service is delayed. If you live around Puget Sound, you know that summertime lines are out of control, and the ferry service, being a state monopoly, is hardly under any kind of pressure to perform for the public. But adding this mandate has made it even worse. And so what this bill would do is just free up the ferry service to begin to contract for the construction of new ferries, build the fleet back up, and provide that essential service that we need in our state. The geography of Washington State is beautiful, but the waterways of Puget Sound definitely divide our populations, our economy, tourism, travel back and forth. It's a vital service. The government won't allow anybody else to do it. It's a monopoly, and yet they've been very slow and inefficient at stepping up themselves. This bill, SB 5710, as I mentioned, would just allow the ferry service to operate in a more normal business-like way, get rid of a lot of the green mandate impediments that Inslee had put in, and allow us to have better service for the public. And that's what everybody wants. Last item, speaking of service, is we did a quick check on the West Seattle Light Rail extension. We received a tip that the federal officials are very skeptical about this process. They're starting to look at the federal contribution to building light rail and to go to West Seattle. This project would cost well over $1 billion a mile. I checked with Charles Prestrud, our expert on this issue. He just gave me the quick numbers. It's 4.1 miles of rail for a minimum of $6.5 billion. So you can do the math as to whether that's worthwhile or not. We hear that the federal government is reviewing that project. And again, we'll see how that comes out. And with that, I'll wrap up and say thanks for watching. And again, we hope you'll like and share our videos, encourage other people to watch. And I'll be back in the future with another update.